Yeah. Yeah, we're rolling. Hey, so welcome back to Season 8, Episode
5.
Cinco.
We're back.
And
Inglorious Pastords live.
and the video is going to be on my phone today
Good.
because the internet is down here at the office. So,
And we can all start putting in bets about how long this will even last today.
I think
Because it's anti-technology. I think today is...
Anti-Technology Day. It's celebrated around the world. So, in case you have a technology problem, understand everyone else is having one as
today.
well.
Yeah, February 9th. It's just mark it on your calendar.
Is it already February 9th?
It is.
I am so far behind. I can't even
Your
tell you.
schedule right now.
I can't even tell you. Wow.
Hey, did you... So, I don't know, this kind of thing just kind of staggers me. And you might have more of a brain. I guess I've just got this small little brain, but...
Is this about meatball passing?
No, it has nothing to do with...
All right. Because I
any
knew that was a big deal for
processed meat.
you. All right.
Or musician. So, last week,
Yeah.
Facebook, I don't know if you saw this, set a one-day record.
I don't have a place in my brain for it.
Okay, the biggest drop in value in history occurred 6 days ago. Facebook lost how much money?
I think it was like 230 billion.
237 billion.
Yeah, I don't even understand.
It's like, no. So the first thing for me to get my...
So,
I would not have known they were worth 237. So
20.
if
Roger,
they lost 237 billion and are moving along just fine,
So I'm thinking.
what are they worth?
237 million would be a lot to me.
Right.
2.8 billion would be unthinkable.
Shocking.
No, I mean, but $237 billion? So I saw something this morning, again shocking. So all of my Bitcoin enthusiasts out there,
Oh, I'm glad you bring this up. Go on.
a couple in New York was arrested for stealing $3 billion of Bitcoin, and it was in their possession. And I still haven't figured out how you possess exactly Bitcoin.
No, it's funny. It's so comical that you bring this up because I had thought about this exact same thing. I was thinking about financial things that are just off my brain. But
Yeah.
So when I go to, I like to go into the Circle K. Most mornings they got a sip and save program, so I go in and get my soda for the day. It ends up being effectively 25 cents. Awesome. But there's a
Only Roger.
Bitcoin machine. So next to the ATM,
Bitcoin.
this is in Circle K.
Yeah.
So there's the ATM where you get cash out.
Yeah.
And I keep wanting to go over there. But there's a
Bitcoin.
there's a Bitcoin ATM machine. And I'm thinking,
What is it going to give you?
where does it go?
Well,
And what do I have to have?
Does it pop out some little gold coins that say bit?
Do I need to? Does it need to have my social security number to attach something to me? If I go to that machine, I'm just dying to go over to that machine.
And just see what it does.
I know what I think. I'm going to check me out some Bitcoin. Where would it go? And now see this out. Where do you use that? And I realize now people talk about paying with Bitcoin, but like, how do you pay with Bitcoin? Do you?
I don't receive Bitcoin. So for counseling and coaching and anything else I do, Bitcoin is out. Now, I was thinking today.
Now, was that an option? Like, I mean, in your payment, whatever payment processor you use.
I can take Bitcoin via Venmo now.
Okay.
I just don't know if my bank's going to take it. In other words, I could ramp up a lot of Bitcoin in Venmo, but then if I go to transfer it to my bank, and then my bank says, yeah, we don't even know what that is.
Well,
Because in one sense, and I'm so naive about this, it's ridiculous. We need to have Tom Schreiner on to talk about Bitcoin because he understands all of it. But I'm like, in one sense, Bitcoin could potentially do away with banks. In other words, individuals have complete control over their transactional system.
Right.
which is fascinating.
Which, from what I've read about,
Until I read that someone can steal 3 billion of your Bitcoin. I mean, imagine if that was your life savings. Look, we've mined, and that's what they do. We've mined $3 billion of Bitcoin. Where'd it go? Someone took my
we had
Bitcoin.
it.
It just,
Well, the other thing with Bitcoin, now I realize that paper money can lose value at some level.
yeah.
But if I have $1 in my pocket, it stays $1.
Whatever that represents in terms of value.
Right. But Bitcoin can lose value. So to read a while back that Bitcoin took a huge drop.
Yeah.
So if I own 1,000, is it like stocks? If I own 1,000 Bitcoin, it's no longer worth 1,000 Bitcoin?
Sure. Right, but if you have 1,000 Bitcoin and it goes up in value, you could
Right.
actually have 4,000
No.
Bitcoin.
Exactly. So
And there's a bunch of cryptocurrencies out there now, Bitcoin just being one of many. Now, I remember I'm going through the transition of my mind that I went through in 1988 when my uncle, Walt Hanford, introduced me to email.
okay.
And I literally was like, what are you talking about? Mail, by definition, is paper
Right.
in a letter that you send
Right.
through the post office. That's
Right.
the mail. We call that the mail. You're saying electronic mail. Well, that doesn't exist.
Right.
There's no such thing. No. He said, on your computer, it'll come up on your computer. I'm like, no, well, mail's not gonna come. I couldn't. It's so funny. It took me forever to figure out what electronic mail was. I wish they had called it a different message. I mean, like electronic messaging, a different word. Because once you said electronic mail, I mean, I'm just like, it's paper.
Your brain could not.
No, isn't that funny?
No. But I think there is some kind of a reminder. Yeah, new technologies always create this kind of dilemma.
Yeah.
It's actually new kind of creates this dilemma because there's this draw and attraction to familiar / old.
Right.
And then there's the tendency then to go beyond that. Of course, what I'm familiar with, I am more likely to defend or even, we use the term moralize.
Yep.
I make it, this new thing
It's somehow
is unhealthy,
ungodly.
unsafe, ungodly. I can see all the bad about it. But it's comical because this is human history.
Oh, yeah.
Even with the printing press and, so now you've got your book purists. Okay, now I'm not going to get a Kindle electronic book because I'm about
An ebook. Right.
because that's the way God intended. But of course, not realizing when paper and printing first came out, they were used to oral. I mean, the primary and you start thinking about these stories. If it's all on print, people won't remember the stories and they won't tell the stories anymore. And it's just
God himself used like stone tablets.
That's the way it ought to be.
That's the way it ought to be because that's sturdy.
Let's chisel it out, baby.
Unless you throw them to the ground. Problem.
So, I guess there's this cautionary tale, this word about too quickly assuming new bad, old good. Now that can go both ways.
Are you about to tell a fable?
Ooh, we could make a fable, right?
No, you said the way you said that. I'm like, oh, this would be like Aesop's fable. Here, let me
Not a
tell you
bad
a
idea,
story
but-
about
You're good at that kind of thing. Let's do one.
on the spot. Well, not today because I've had so little sleep. It's not a good day to.
It's a wonder we're even.
It's really not a good day for me to be doing anything ad lib.
All right, and this will be our shortest podcast ever.
So, with that, Pastords signing off.
Signing off. We love you.
We shouldn't do that because some people just turned off. Actually, the two listeners.
If they hadn't already.
Well, that's true.
If we look at our metrics to see how many even get to this point. Wait, you have the finger.
The finger.
Okay.
So
you gave me the finger.
Sunday, I did a little talk at Cove Church on grief called Good Grief. And I love the title of that because it's the idea that grief is good.
Yeah.
Okay, but you remember growing up, when Mom and Dad said good grief, it wasn't in a good sense. It was like, oh, good grief. It's not like the world's coming to an end. The idea was good grief meant you're being silly, you're overreacting, you're being dramatic.
Right.
Okay? And I realized even as a kid, that was one of my cues. That grief was not good. I remember one situation in specific where one of my parents, I won't say which one, said, oh, good grief, stop crying. And I had this little, I need to stop crying. Crying's bad. In other words, it wasn't the idea that grief was good.
Right.
But the grief was somehow not good.
But if I did a timeout there, it seems to me that...
If you did, you just did a timeout.
May I please do a timeout?
No, because you presumed that you could time out. Yes, do a timeout there.
I just realized, okay, and of course our parents were conditioned, but we're all conditioned by things circumstantially.
Sure.
But even the idea, stop crying. What's, as if what is... I guess I could ask you this. Is there any time crying is bad?
Well,
is there any time crying is bad?
I don't know. I haven't, again, not a lot of sleep, Raj. This is not the day to throw that at me.
I don't think you heard me.
I see crying as good, and I talked about even Sunday about why crying is good.
Yes.
And even, it's fascinating to me that I did this in my head because I do this random stuff all the time. The shortest verse in the Bible, which I memorized early on, John 11:35. No one could say I didn't memorize Scripture. Jesus wept. And it's this idea of sobbing uncontrollably. Then you say Jesus, a tear formed, And in that story with Lazarus, it says he was deeply moved and troubled in spirit. 2 different times. So
Right.
3 different times. It's a very powerful thing. But I'm just thinking about the guy that was on horseback that was dividing all of the Bible into chapters and verses. You remember this story from Bible school? So he's going along. Apparently, at some points, he's literally on a horse and he's dividing. This is going to be a chapter and this will be verses. And I can just see him just going along. All right, we're going to tie this here and this will be. And then Jesus wept. We're going to put that at the end of this sentence. And it's like God said, no, that's its own verse. And he's like, well, it's just 2 words. It can't be a verse. No, seriously, I want it to be a verse. I don't want people to miss it. Jesus wept. That's the verse. No, it's only 2 words. I'm gonna tuck it in here at the bottom of the. It's don't make me come down there. And I thought about the importance of the shortest verse of the Bible was a verse about Jesus grieving. Then I found something else really cool. That's why I love doing study for these messages, because you see these cool things.
Yes. No.
So from the cross, Jesus grieves out loud, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? And he's quoting, it's a direct quote from Psalm 22.
Yeah.
And it's a whole psalm of lament, of grief.
Grieving, yeah.
And here's what I think about how important that psalm is. So when we think of the most popular psalm, what do you think of?
Psalm 23.
The one right after it. And that's often quoted at funerals, interestingly enough. But do you realize what psalm is most quoted in the New Testament?
Psalm
By
22.
Multiple authors. Psalm 22. Okay. A psalm of lament. A psalm of grief.
Yeah.
And I was struck with, how did we miss that? Because I did whatever cues I got, not just from mom and dad, but cues from my culture, that crying was not good. Or it was only in certain really severe kind of situations. And
there were times when it was appropriate to cry, maybe. Even the signal, stop crying, it's not appropriate to cry now.
Or it's annoying.
Right, which could have been. I think one of the things I've realized with crying as well, and whether this was part of it, is crying, I think, is seen or somehow connected with weakness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That
would
where I think
be perceived as a weak emotion.
Right. So if we call it a weak emotion, so if we think about, we don't want to see a politician or leader in a moment of crisis breaking down because they're supposed to be.
That would be funny though. We've just found out that we're under attack by blah 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 country. I just, well, I mean, it wouldn't really instill confidence in the nation.
We're making the point that
it's possible that crying might not be appropriate in every situation. But like that time that I got lost on the trail and I'm leading the entire group. Crying would not be what they're looking for.
But where we've gotten even there, we say, okay, is it not healthy? We can look and say, okay, that could scare people, or that's. But we're clearly making connection that minimally tears feel like weakness. They feel like. Well, even think we've talked about being overwhelmed with tears.
Yeah.
Something comes over me, but I can still. I was watching a movie the other day, and I began to cry, but I was really because I was about to break into sobs.
Oh wow!
But I would not let myself.
You caught yourself.
Do that now, and maybe because Joy was in the room, if I was by myself, no, I know, I've sobbed by myself.
Yep.
But I can feel the check when something where I have tears, but I'm only going to let them go so far. I don't know. It's just that innate thing of I'm trying not to, because sobbing is a kind of out of control.
Roger, you just preached the message Sunday. I talk about 4 obstacles to grief.
Oh,
Why
okay.
don't we grieve?
Yeah.
One of them is guilt, and it's this idea that if I had only. There's so many if-onlys. Because Cove Church is going through the whole story of Job. Well, he has a billion if-onlys. If only I hadn't, let the shepherds keep the sheep on the hill where the firestorm came. If only I hadn't let the kids be at their oldest brother's house where they're all together at the same time.
Yes.
If only there's all these if-onlys, and so when there's a loss, whether it's the loss of a friend, whether it's the death of someone, whether it's the loss of a job, we can go through these if-onlys. We're trying to go back. It's almost like we're trying to go back and fix it.
Yeah.
And so we just can't grieve it. And I just talked about this, the reality of part of how you overcome that is just recognize, hey, God's in charge. Even if it was a mistake that I made that brought this loss, God's in charge. We need to grieve. We need to. But the second thing I talked about is, and this is my worst one, we don't want to be a burden to others.
Yeah.
We don't want, like if Marlena's in the room and it's a little embarrassing. I don't want to sob in front of Marlena because I know that she'll feel a little afraid for me or sad for whatever that is, but we don't want to be a burden to others. And so my point was, be a burden.
Yeah.
In other words, when you go through loss, be a burden, because Galatians 2 talks about bear one another's burdens. Well, it assumes 2 things. It assumes that someone's willing to carry a burden, but it also assumes the other person is willing to let them in.
Right. Willing
to let them grieve with them. And I do think first century Jewish culture was much better at grieving, literally mourning, wailing. I don't know about whether I would hire mourners to come in and some of the stuff that I've heard that happened. The third...
Well, hold on just a bit. It reminds me of that Lean on Me, that line in the song, I'm not able to carry a burden that you won't you won't share. That there is this, and honestly, yeah.
Well, not only do we don't want to be a burden, but we don't want to be a bother. Like, do they want me to be with them right now? This is where Krista Wells' song "Come Close Now" is so profound. She says, "Can I come close now?" She talks about how the song was formed. There was a friend of hers that lost their spouse.
Yeah.
And he said he felt like he was living in his house now that was empty, but it was all burning down around him. And he was all alone in this. And so she wrote this song called "Come Close Now," but she said, "Can I come close now? Shall I sing while the roof is coming down? Can I sing while the flames grow higher?" And then she just talks about, I'm going to choose to risk the fire, risk the burn, and come in close. But I realized for me, I don't want to be a burden to other people, so I'm much more inclined to say, I'm fine, no, I'm good. Even if I'm experiencing depression, I don't like to talk about it.
It from my own experience, is it possible there's a bit of a pride in there too that, or no, I'll say this for me, I don't want to need
let's
people.
Let's not use that right after my illustration.
I don't want I can realize, okay, I don't
People
want to be a
need
burden.
me, but I don't need them.
But at some level, there's this part of me that doesn't want to need people.
Right.
That doesn't want to need somebody helping me with my burden. That whole thing with not asking for help. Because whether I'm letting go grief or I'm just revealing this weakness that suggests I do need outside help. I do need people. I do need others. So I find that mixed in with for me, I don't want to be a burden. Part of that can also be, well, I don't want to need somebody to help me carry my burden.
I don't want
Anyway.
a burden so big that it has to be that I'm going to need help.
Right. That I can't do it alone. And
Right.
So I really don't want to send the signal that I might not be able, I'm not big enough.
Dude,
I can do that with God. I'm comfortable doing that with God. But other
not
people.
with people. Isn't that interesting? Yes, you do have a problem with pride. I think we've diagnosed that. No, that's an interesting
Counseling
thing.
with Bruce.
No, where you and I are both similar is we don't like to ask others for help. Like, even if I'm moving like big, heavy pieces of furniture and I've got to get them somewhere and get them in my truck and take it, I mean, you have giant appliances, I will figure out how to do it using leverage.
No, well, but I'll push back on that a little. There is this, I've gotten better about asking for help, but I do like the challenge of figuring out, is it possible to do this as one person?
Yeah.
So I've moved refrigerators.
Well, I have back problems, Roger. Okay.
I moved the refrigerator from Zach's shed to my eBay house, did the entire thing myself, and I had to go through, there were some places that it was comically, but part of it was the fun of figuring out and doing it.
Right.
I have gotten better.
Enough talk about the refrigerator. Let's get back to grief.
I mean, but that makes me so sad.
No, I had to go into the progressive moment. Don't become like your parents. No, finish the story about the refrigerator. It's good.
I'm good.
I'm fine.
I don't need sympathy.
Fine. Feelings inside never expressed. I talk about that a lot. So, all right. So this third component of grief, of obstacle to grief, I just put what I called Christian subcultural expectations. It's almost like, if you grieve too much, people are like, well, they just don't have faith. In other words, even when I think about funerals, it's like, he's in a better place. We're going to get through this. God is good all the time. And we say all these things that are quite true, but we don't allow ourselves to just grieve. This is a loss. Even if it's a temporary loss, it's a loss. And it's like these expectations that I'm supposed to be strong. And I've even, in counseling, working with people through grief, and they're like, yeah, I'm trying not to cry in front of my kids. And I'm like, look, the best thing you can do is cry in front of cry with your kids. Yeah. Let them know it is okay to grieve, to lament. Just go read out loud Psalm 22 together. Yeah. My God, why hast that's how it starts. Yeah. Why hast thou forsaken me?
This, one of the things that struck me at the first African-American black funeral, and many I've attended tragically since, just many funerals, one of the pronounced differences between those funerals and the funerals I grew up with was wailing.
Yep.
But I realized this healthy part, we were too refined, and I wonder if part of it was the spiritual, when trusting God, you're not just going to cut loose.
As the Stoicism is more spiritual.
Yes. But there was something life-giving even in this wailing, which just captured the grieving is real. Jesus wept over Lazarus, and where we're so often trying to check our fears, this healthy thing, and then this other thing just about crossing ethnic barriers and being around people different than you realize places, they have a window into health that you were missing. And
and the important part of that is, even though Jesus knew the end of the story for Lazarus, he still grieved that moment. And I realize it's the same thing at any funeral. Even though we know the end of the story, we grieve. There will be a resurrection. It's even like, at one point, Martha comes to Jesus and she said, if you'd been here, he wouldn't have died. But I know that even now, She had great faith.
Oh, yes.
Even now I know that the Father will do whatever you ask.
Right.
And so Jesus says, well, your brother's going to rise again. And she interpreted that as your brother's in a better place. She said, well, I know at the end of all things, he's going to be raised from the dead.
Okay.
I get
Captain
it.
Obvious.
Right? It was almost that. Well, right, Jesus, yeah, we all got it. And he's like, no, I meant today. I meant now. And there was that, just that wow moment. And then I talked even about Mary and her grieving and she was grieving so deeply, she didn't go to Jesus. She didn't go ahead and go. I mean, and Scripture points it out.
Right.
Martha went out to see Jesus, but Mary stayed home. This same disciple who sat at his feet now is so disappointed, in such deep grief.
And we grieve in different ways.
Right. And she may not even know what she's going to say to him.
Right.
But she's feeling what Martha felt, which is, because she come back, and when she does come out, she says the same thing.
Her grieving is showing up as withdrawal, pulling away.
Yes. And Jesus says the same thing to her. If you had been here, Lazarus wouldn't have died. And that was where it says Jesus deeply moved.
Yeah.
It says, take me to the tomb. And I'm like, so 3 different times in that thing, it just talks about Jesus grieving, deeply moved, troubled in spirit. Oh, and by the way, I did talk about withdrawal being part of grief. You realize that Matthew records when Jesus' cousin, John the Baptist, was executed. It says that Jesus withdrew privately to a solitary place. And I just talk about sometimes we have to grieve. We have to get alone with God and just pour it out. And that's where some of the Psalms can really help.
Yeah.
Because there's Psalms of lament. And then the last point of obstacles to grief was, we're afraid of losing control.
Yeah.
We're afraid if I let this go, I'll never come out of it.
Back.
I can't get it back. I remember going through that season, when we lost our daughter, I'm just like, I can't. Every day I wake up. Every day I woke up for months. My first waking thought was not coffee, which normally it is.
Right.
Actually, it's God and then coffee. I just want to clarify that for our listeners.
Good. I feel so much better.
Yeah. But no, the first thought was this, I don't have a daughter. And it's weird how I don't have a daughter. It's like sleep was the one respite from that pain, and then it would just settle on my chest that morning, and it was like, well, and I was afraid I'm never going to come out of this.
Right.
And I think with sobbing, that's my fear.
Yeah.
Because I'll cry and I'll let tears come, but if I start sobbing, it feels super out of control. Interestingly enough, I don't mind out of control laughing. Do that all the time. Did it last week during the podcast.
Right.
But out of control sobbing seems scary.
Right. Because it's a weak emotion, using your term. It's that, and I guess that's part of the fear of, let's say, as you and I have done, you're performing a funeral, you're officiating a funeral, and you realize if you enter so deeply into the grieving, you begin sobbing, then you can't say anything anymore.
Well, and I've done that where it took me a minute to get it back.
But even there, again, don't think that's a bad thing. I think it's
well, no, I think it's I think it's very much relating to the human condition.
Right.
And last thing I'll say on grief, because it's just on my heart today. But I was reading, just in my personal devotions, I've been reading through Luke right now. So I'm in Luke chapter 7, there's a story that I've read many times. And again, it's a story where Jesus knows the end of the story. But Jesus comes up to this village, Nain, and there's a funeral procession. And there's a woman that's just weeping, and the scripture says she was a widow. So she's already lost her husband at some point. Her only son has died. This is her only son. So now she's destitute. So it's not just the loss of relationship, it's the loss of
financial security.
And everything. And I missed something all the years that I taught this. And this is where I finished up on Sunday. It says, Jesus saw her and his heart went out to her. Isn't that beautiful? And I just stopped it right there. Because, you could go to the end of the story, but we're missing the point. Jesus, his heart went out to her. I'm like, that is the best biblical definition of empathy I could give a person, where my heart joins with your heart and I enter into your pain.
Yeah.
My heart goes to you.
Yeah,
and I just thought, that is so powerful. And I just encourage listeners, listen, whatever loss you're going through, know this, Jesus' heart is going out to you, joins you in that pain. And, in my experience, God doesn't relieve the pain. but he joins us in the pain. He's present in the pain. That's why those words, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you, not even to the end of the age. I'm with you always. That's why his presence is so powerful, even though what we want is pain relief.
And it's also why it's this great reminder why we need to grieve with others.
Yes.
If God is a
Yeah.
griever, if God weeps with us, again, weeping with others, I love that, just weep with those who weep. Again, isn't that saying that it's healthy? Again, letting the emotions flow.
It seems to be a command as well.
Right, it does.
Think about that.
Right.
I suggest that you weep with
Right.
those. He didn't say that.
Right.
He just said weep with those. That
Maybe even knowing
that the larger context being live in harmony with one another.
Right.
Just love that passage.
Because maybe when people are weeping, we want to stop them. I want to make it better. So isn't the counter word here? Just weep with them.
Just weep with them.
Don't tell them stop crying. Don't tell them it's time to get over it.
That's Krista Wells' song. She says, "Lay down your plans, lay down your surefire fix. Grief's going to stay a while. There is no cure for this." Such a beautiful line in that song. Here's another thing that I'll share because I don't know how much time we have.
I don't either.
But I argued Sunday morning that because out of the book, it's called Getting Grief Right. He argues there's no one right way to grieve, but he says if you love, you will grieve. But then I added this, and this is just from my personal experience.
Mm-hmm.
But if you grieve deeply, it grows your capacity to love deeply.
Yes.
If you grieve deeply,
Yep.
And I realized part of my journey toward loving others, truly, has been the willingness to grieve with others, to allow my heart to go out to them. When I was a young pastor, I didn't. I would stay very, in one sense, sterile from it. I'm supposed to be in control, so they can weep and cry and be sad, but
I'm supposed to be strong for them.
I'm supposed to be strong for them.
Yes, that's what leaders do.
And tell them the right things.
Right.
And I realized I wasn't letting my heart go
Yeah.
out to them. So now I ended up crying Sunday morning twice, both services,
Okay.
when I got to that point, because it was just so it's still beautiful to me.
It is.
That God's heart goes out to us, and then we're called to do the same for others. Weep with those that weep. Let our hearts go. Gosh, that's antithetical to control, isn't it?
No.
Boy, we want to control our heart. No one's going to hurt it. I don't want to feel pain.
Yeah. Don't want it to get out of control. So maybe
Wrapping up.
wrapping up.
We're probably
We
around
don't
30
know how
minutes.
much time we have.
I think my phone gives us 30
Do
minutes.
you know what the longest verse in the Bible is?
I forgot. I knew the longest chapter was Psalm 119.
So super fast story. So the fun finishing on a non-grieving note because
You can't
this
do
was a
anything super fast. That's not even possible.
celebratory note. So I was in Sunday school. I don't know, 8, 9, 10, whatever. Highland Park Sunday School.
Yep.
Maybe I was 8 or 9. So I'm in a class, and the teacher says the longest verse in the Bible is Esther 8:9. He says, "For anyone who will, I'll have a prize next week for anyone who memorizes the longest verse in the Bible."
It's Esther 8:9?
Esther 8:9.
What is it?
Well, I couldn't say it now, but I
know you memorized it.
I memorized it.
Well, chunk it out.
No, so I memorized it. There's about eunuchs and precepts, and it's all it's all kinds of.
Who doesn't love a verse about eunuchs and precepts?
Anyway, you get in there. It's a weird verse. It ain't Jesus wept. Anyway, so the next week.
The chapter guy might have missed the
No, so
nudge on that one.
how many of you memorized Esther 8:9? I was the only one in the class, and he took me out to eat.
I remember this.
You remember that? He took me
You
out
got
to
a
eat.
banana split.
Well, okay, that's the third part. He took me out to eat, and then he took me to a store, bought me a model car to build, and then took me to Baskin Robbins to get an ice cream, all because I memorized the longest verse in the Bible, Esther 8:9.
And Roger, that's the reason I would cheat in those Sunday school prize programs. You remember?
you
Had I known,
creative truth telling was your gift.
no, there's nothing true about it. It's only creative truth telling if there's a portion of truth in it.
Johnny and Clark.
They don't exist. Never talked to them. But they're in my brother's classes. They're older than me.
These visitors.
I
Bruce
got a
brought-
baseball bat, a little baseball bat penknife with a ball attached to it with the little chain. That's worth getting a spanking for, because my brothers ratted me out.
The problem is, like you can't really fake memorizing Esther 8:9. It's
really
like,
can't.
okay, Mr. Martin, why don't you say that for us?
Well, actually, you could. You could have written it on your hand and done this. Let me think. Oh, let me
Oh,
think.
Bruce.
Let me think here.
It's an awful lot of writing.
Okay.
It's a longer verse than you think it is.
Precept upon precept. Something about eunuchs and stuff, and Esther saw the king. I can't imagine.
So today you've learned John 11:35, shortest verse in the Bible.
Jesus wept.
Esther 8:9, longest verse in the Bible.
And if Jesus was willing to express grief and to sob uncontrollably, we have permission to do the same. It's not a lack of faith.
Yeah.
It's not a lack of, we don't believe the rest of the story. We know that God's good. We know that God's loving.
It's good for us and it's good for others. This carrying of burdens, of letting our heart go. So let's
Good talk.
let's wrap it up there.
Okay. We'll see you next week. Well, it's actually 50-50.
Right.
If we have technology, we'll see you next week.
And maybe next week you can give us your thought about being 58. Reflections on turning 58.
Okay, I haven't written that yet.
Okay,
I'll write that
let's do
between
that
now
next
and
week.
then. Okay, that's a